since 1988. I had the pleasure in 1992 when I started teaching to interact with him, and we've been doing it ever since. We've been great friends, and you're going to really enjoy this lecture on Introduction to Satellite Applications. All right, Scott, take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you all today about our introduction to satellite applications. I'm going to have the great fun of presenting 4 different lectures to you. This one is our introduction to the entire domain of what satellite applications are. Arthur Clarke,
Mhm.
the brilliant space visionary scientist, science fiction writer, thinker, said many amazing things, but I really love this one. Only if what I tell you appears absolutely unbelievable, we any chance of visualizing the future as it will really happen. And what I want to talk to you today is not only about where we are, how we got here, and also the amazing things that you all will see in your lifetimes. So far, we've covered some really amazing subjects. We talked about the electromagnetic spectrum and electromagnetic energy, what it is, how it propagates through free space in a vacuum, talked about orbits and the mechanics of orbits and gravity, talked about the primary orbits that we have around the Earth. And then we also heard about satellites and their components and how we put these things together and what they are. And so now my job is to put all of the things that you've heard so far together. And I'm going to talk to you about what is really important to me, which is how we can put these incredible technologies to use right here on planet Earth. So, why is this important? Why do I get the chance to about this today? Satellites are access to space, the fundamental scientific knowledge that we've been able to gain, the engineering prowess that we've developed to harness that knowledge provides amazing benefits to all the peoples of our planet. And in fact, satellites are an incredibly interwoven part of our modern digital world. A day without satellites would be a very bad day. And also, satellites provide the only real commercial space industry. If you want a job in space, satellite applications is where it is. Satellite applications, telecommunications, remote sensing, navigation, these are the space industry. It's where the jobs are, it's where the innovation and money is happening today. So, what am I going to talk to you about? Well, we're doing the introductions and we had our little dance routine earlier. I hope you like that. I'm going to talk to you about the primary satellite applications, satellite telecommunications, space remote sensing, satellite navigation, and timing. Has 2 different terms in use these days: position, navigation, and timing, or PNT. And it's also referred to as Global Navigation Satellite Systems, or GNSS. We're going to talk about how we pull these things together to create amazing applications. And this picture that you're looking at here is a real life example of how in the United States and California, NASA has worked together with uh, federal and local and state fire activities to incorporate all of these things: satellite telecommunications, remote sensing, positioning, and navigation into our ability to fight forest fires. So, we're going to talk about each of these in turn. I'm going to do my introductory lecture, and then I'm going to give you guys an individual lecture on each of these: telecom, remote sensing, and navigation. And we're going to talk about integration and how we're going to put all of these things together. So after this lecture, I hope you will be able to understand and define what satellite applications are, pretty much kind of what the market is, how much of this stuff is going on. You should definitely know the three main application areas, understand a little bit of the historical context and the practical uses, understand the commercial business applications, the innovations that are ongoing right now. And throughout all of these, there's this big issue which we refer to as dual use. I don't know if you've been exposed to this term yet, but dual use means technologies that are useful both for practical, beneficial, and commercial applications that are also applicable equally for national security and military type activities. And all of these satellite applications are what we call dual use technologies. And this makes things somewhat complicated in terms of issues like international cooperation, technology transfer, and things like that. So, just to try to set the stage a little bit, Isaac Asimov, very famous science fiction writer and one of my favorites, said if he could summarize the legacy of our space age in a single word, it would be the word globalism. And he didn't mean this in the way that we think of it today, like containers at sea bringing, blue jeans from Asia to North America. He meant seeing our planet for the first time as a single whole, as a planet. And this has been referred to many times in our space community. Carl Sagan, brilliant Carl Sagan, in his wonderful novel Contact. And perhaps you've seen the film, but I would urge you to read the book. It's extremely well written. But he said in there that nations, primarily the US and the old Soviet Union, had instituted space flight, did so primarily for nationalistic reasons. And it's no small irony that everyone who entered space received this amazing perspective of the Earth as a single world. And Bill Anders, one of the three Apollo 8 astronauts, one of the three people, first people of our species to leave the gravity well of the Earth and fly to the moon, said that we came all this way to explore the moon, but the most important thing is that we discovered the Earth. So today, I'm going to try to put all the things that you've learned already into the context of practical, beneficial applications here on Earth. So satellite telecommunications is by far the largest of the applications: Earth observation and remote sensing, satellite navigation, positioning, and timing. And there are integrative tools and technologies, geographic information systems, and geomatics tie all of these things together so that we can do practical and useful things. So here on this very busy slide, but it's a big screen behind me, so you can actually read this. These are the primary satellite services. And as I said before, satellite applications of space exist because of these. And the biggest by far is our use of telecommunications, direct consumer, so people receiving radio or television, watching movies directly from satellites. We have voice and video, people providing rural services, telemedicine, telehealth, teleeducation. All of these telecommunications activities are very, very important to our global digital world that we all live in today. Then we have the remote sensing and the many different applications that we use, our ability to, Jim did a wonderful job of talking about space science and looking out at the heavens, looking at other planets and asteroids, looking at other galaxies. I'm interested in turning all that capability around and looking back at this planet, our beautiful spaceship Earth, and remote sensing technologies allow us to monitor our world, to monitor things like fires and ocean flooding, things like urban planning, many, many different applications. And we can combine all of these together. And notice at the bottom, all of the support services, the infrastructure. People in space love launch vehicles. We love to watch our launch vehicles fly. But the satellite launch vehicles is a tiny part of the world's space industry, and it really exists primarily to support the commercial world of satellite applications. All the business of space insurance, launch insurance, the manufacturing, training, ground equipment, all of these things really are part of the commercial space world, and that's satellite applications. And we use this term a lot, satellites. What do we really mean when we say this word? And it's a fascinating story. The original term satellites is the plural of the ancient Latin satellus. And a satellus was a servant or an attendant, often a slave, who served some powerful master or lord. And it was at the time of Galileo, and Jim Green talked to you about the amazing history of how we harnessed optics to be able to make telescopes so he could do these observations. And it was the time of Galileo when he first saw these little tiny things scurrying around the planets. And so our planets are named after the ancient Greek and Roman gods, Jupiter and Saturn. And since they discovered these little tiny things running, scurrying around them, the term satellites was used. All the writing back then was in Latin. And so they used the term satellites to describe what these things were. It's actually a wonderful name because the satellites that we have today, that Jim Green showed you, these beautiful engineered devices that we operate in space, are satellites. They are servants of humanity. And so next time you hear someone use the term satellites, think about what that term actually means and where it came from. So, and Jim spoke to you about this before, we have a lot of satellites. We've launched a lot of things into space and we've left a lot of junk up there, and it's becoming a very major problem. But right now, it changes week by week. But right now, we have something over 6,600 satellites in orbit right now. The number is about half of those that are actually live and working and useful. About half of them are no longer functioning. And we've seen a huge increase in the number of launches, primarily led by Elon Musk and his Starlink and his other activities. So in 2020 alone, we've launched 1,200 satellites. Unfortunately, most of the things in orbit today are junk, and that's a real problem. But ever since Sputnik, we put a lot of stuff up in space, and we're going to have to figure out how to get rid of all the junk that we've left up there. This is an interesting slide. It's a bit old, 2016, but this shows an approximation of the world government's expenditures on space. And the total is about 62 billion US dollars. You can see clearly the United States has by far the largest program. In fact, this blue circle is smaller than it actually should be, just to make it all fit on one page. And you can see here North America, Europe, and if I look down here, you can see the Arab world, and we can see the Middle East and the amount of expenditures that are being put out. And these are by nation states and governments. Commercial industries are actually also spending a great deal of money. In 2012, so this is about 10 years ago, and the world has changed a great deal in those 10 years. But about 10 years ago, here's the breakdown of the kinds of satellites on the right. And you can see that about 60% of satellites at that time were either commercial, civil, or military telecommunications satellites. Gem space science was relatively small, less than 10%, remote sensing about 10%, navigation about 10%. You can see here the orbital breakdown on the left, about half of them in LEO, a little bit less than that in GEO, and those MEO navigation and the highly elliptical orbits that Jim presented to you before. Here's the space industry as of 2015, and again, a little bit old, but it's still pretty valid. This shows you that satellite services, and by this I mean direct broadcast, people receiving television, movies, telecommunications, is by far the largest business in space, 127 billion US dollars. Ground segments is about 100 billion. That's all the receiving dishes, all the GPS receivers. And you can see here that the satellite manufacturing and launch services are really quite a small, that's very small. It's what we see, it's what we're interested in watching, the launches, but the launch industry is a very small segment of the overall satellite world. And again, you can see of all the working satellites up there at this time, the majority of these were telecommunications, about half of them. And then we have the Earth observation, research, weather satellites, etc. Here's something a little bit more recent. This is 2020, and this shows you how the world has changed. Elon Musk has really altered the landscape with his ability to reuse uh, rockets and to be able to put large numbers of satellites into orbit. He's launched himself over 2,000 satellites, over a third of all the working satellites in orbit have been launched by Elon Musk. Many of them are for his own companies. So you see today now we have about equal number of remote sensing and telecommunications satellites. Again, in the upper right, by far, most of the satellites that have ever been launched or are currently operating are operated by the United States. So these are all just slides of background information to help you understand the context. We've spoken before already about the primary orbit. So we have three general orbits that we use in satellite applications. The geostationary ring out here, also referred to as the Clark orbit, in honor of Arthur C. Clarke, who first really envisioned the concept of geostationary satellite telecommunications. That's where most of the satellite telecom world lives. You see this highly elliptical orbit. This is one of the United States global positioning systems. They live in what we call MEO, and we'll talk more about that later. And then here, very close to the surface of the Earth, you see the LEO satellites, and that's very close to the Earth. That's where the International Space Station lives, and that's where most of the remote sensing and now many new telecom satellite constellations reside. So we have three primary orbits: LEO, MEO, and GEO. Of course, it's a continuum. There's not splits in between them. You could launch a satellite into any of these orbits or beyond. But mostly in the application world, we have LEO, which is down here just barely skimming the surface of the planet. in this view, halfway out our diagram, we have the navigation satellites, Galileo, GPS, GLONASS, etc. And then farther out, we have that magical orbit, the Clark orbit, where satellites will just hang there stationary in space. And as you move, it moves with you. So, why do we want to focus on this? Why do we really want to talk about this? And as I said before, remote sensing, telecom, navigation, these are really the practical benefits of our access to space, not counting dual use national security type activities or the fundamental space science that Jim Green and his colleagues do. These are really the commercially viable space activities. These are where the jobs are. Launch service industry really exists primarily to support them. And this is big business by anybody's measurement. This is very big business. Global telecommunications business in 2021 was over 4 trillion US dollars. Now, not all of that involves space satellites, but a good percentage of it does. And so we're talking big business, we're talking big money, and a lot of jobs. So I hope you find this interesting today. I think this is fascinating stuff, and we're going to talk even more. And so, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make you wake up a little bit. I'm going to make everybody do a metaverse virtual wave. Yes, that's right. You're going to have to do a virtual wave. And so, I'm going to start over here on this side. And as I point to you, I want everybody to give me a wave. Give me a wave. I'm not seeing a wave. Give me a wave. Okay. Let's go back. Let's go back. Let's give a wave. Give a wave. There we go. Put them up in the air. There we go. Over here. Let's see you guys give a wave. There you go. Excellent. All right. All right. Want you guys to do it at home too. No excuse. Get up, dance around a little bit. Want you to wake up so that you can pay attention and listen to the important information I'm trying to give to you. So, Jim Green talked to you about orbits, and I want to show you a very brief video now that I prepared. There's this wonderful website called Satellite Explorer, and it's got a fairly long URL. You can see the URL up there. It's quite long, but I want you to please pay attention and watch this live interactive demonstration that I'm going to do. It's easier to do this briefly on a video than try to do it live in the metaverse. So please pay attention and take a look at this really interesting website. And the whole idea of this is that I want all of you folks to be able to go out and access this website. It's a great way to learn about orbits and the applications that we have with these satellites. So let's roll that tape. Hey, everybody. It's the real me here. This is the real Scott, a very good avatar. So I wanted to share with you this really exciting website that I think will be very useful for all of you. It's freely available, and it tells us all about all of the satellites that we have in orbit around the Earth today. And so you can see the web link there, and what they've done is they've taken all the ephemeris data from all the satellites, put it in here, and added some really nice educational content too. So when you go to the website, you will notice that you have complete control over by clicking your mouse or clicking on your mouse pad, and you can revolve all this. You can push it away and zoom farther out, so you can see some of these satellites that go way, way out there, and we can also go way, way, way in and look at all those satellites that we have. And you can rotate the world, so we can put it right over Saudi Arabia. So you'll notice that it has a section on orbits, and you might want to go and look at this. I know you've already had the orbits presented to you, but if you click on each of these, it'll show you some information about the various different low inclination, medium inclination, and that magical geosynchronous belt that's out there. And you can go back by clicking on this little return arrow here. But what I want to do is show you this section about purpose. And what this does is it shows us the primary purposes that we have for all of these satellites. And so you'll notice here right now is displayed all the navigation satellites, and I'm just rotating it with my mouse here. This is all the navigation satellites that we have, and I'm going to give you a lecture on these later. If you get it off and lost and you don't know where you are, you can always just click on this little house over here in the upper left, and it takes you back to the default view. So here, these are all our navigation satellites. It tells us there's 146 of them. If I click here, now it's going to show us all the telecommunications satellites that we have. You can see many of them live out in that magic geostationary arc where the satellites all stay in the same place. And we can also look at all the Earth observation satellites. So in my next lectures, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here each lecture and talk about the specifics of the different kinds of satellites, their orbits, and what they do. And one of the great things about this website, and I hope you will please take some time and play with this, is that you can click on any orbit and it will show you what that satellite is. So we can click on a satellite here. This is one of the Chinese Beidou navigation satellites. It gives us some information about what that is. And if you click on Go to Satellite, it tells you some specific information about it. It tells you when it was launched, where it was launched from, on what kind of a launcher, and it gives you the orbital apogee and perigee. And we can click on Go to Current Location, and it will actually take us to where on the planet that satellite actually is right now, right as we're watching this. This is in the polar seas, about halfway between Cape Town, South Africa, and the Antarctic continent. So this is a wonderful website. I think it's worth your going and exploring, and I'll be using this to explain in each of the 3 upcoming lectures the kinds of satellites that we use. So let's go back to my other reality and we'll continue with our lecture. All right, how's that? Isn't that cool? And that's available for use. So I hope all of you will take the opportunity to go visit that website, and we'll be looking more at that in the 3 following lectures as well. So let's quickly go through the fundamentals of each of these. Satellite telecommunications really is the business, the commercial business of space. Arthur C. Clarke, the brilliant space visionary, first conceptualized, although it's not really true, Hermann Oberth and others had discussed the possibility of a geostationary orbit, but Arthur Clarke is really the one who made this a real possibility. It made geo very profitable real estate. We often refer to geo, a position in geo, as the most expensive location off the earth. Very, very expensive location because you can hang one of these huge satellites up there and make a tremendous amount of money. Not only is this an enormous commercial space activity with tens of thousands of jobs all around the planet, this alone has helped to create our global village, the global electronic world. I'm lecturing to you. It doesn't matter where you are on the planet. We all live now in a global electronic village, and much of this is because of our ability to harness communication. So basically, what it does is we have a radio transmitter, nothing more complex than that. Although in reality, it's actually very complex up in space. And this gives us the ability to broadcast to a very large area on the planet. And so we can do all the things that are parts of our modern global world: voice over internet, multimedia, distance learning, telemedicine, teleeducation. All of these things are largely made possible in our world, particularly in rural areas, particularly in places like the Pacific Islands in Australia and in the Middle East, where laying fiber optic is really not a practical option. We're seeing a huge revolution in the satellite telecommunication world right now. Right now, as we speak, Elon Musk and his new company, Starlink, have placed in orbit a huge number of satellites in a very low Earth orbit with a tiny little receiving station. We'll talk a lot about this in the lecture on satellite telecommunications, but point here is that we're undergoing a very large change today from using primarily geostationary satellites, very high orbit, latency, some other issues along with that, down to massive numbers of very low Earth orbit satellites. And this is going on right now, and it's going to fundamentally change your world as we speak. Second, uh, traditional application of satellites is Earth remote sensing. This is my area of research. I've worked in satellite remote sensing for many, many years, worked on the very early Landsat programs, Landsat satellites. And satellites provide us with an extraordinary ability to monitor our planet. Very dual use technologies. The first satellite remote sensing systems were the first Soviet Union and United States spy satellites. It's got a very long and fascinating history, and all of these military technologies eventually become commercial and public benefit technologies. And so we see now today a huge number of satellites revolving around our planet, providing us with global daily weather, with disaster response, like the terrible issue going on right now in Turkey and Syria. If hundreds of people using satellites, satellite technologies to be able to try to respond to that disaster activity that's going on. Remote sensing has fundamentally changed the way we think about planet Earth. It provided a tremendously important stabilizing process during the terrible years of the Cold War. It allowed both the United States and the Soviet Union to have an eye looking behind the curtain, if you will, and provided this wonderful stabilizing capability. And it has generated tremendous technology transfer potentials. We have modern, very high resolution satellites. We can take images with a pixel resolution or a ground resolution of half a meter and less. We can look at our world, we can analyze our world, and as I mentioned before, we can integrate these with other tools for practical applications like disaster management. I've done a lot of work in the disaster management field, and space technologies and our access to these is a key component in how we do disaster response today. Satellites give us accurate ability to map our world on a constant basis. Dual use, again, is an issue, but I want to also point out we use exactly the same things on other planets as well. The way we do remote sensing on Mars, on Venus, on other bodies in the solar system. It's exactly the same technologies, exactly the same fundamental physics and techniques and engineering. We can do this on our planet. We can do it on other planets as well. And it's a big commercial business, not nearly as big as telecom, but it is a large and growing commercial business. And what it does is it gives us this view of our planet. And here's a very brief little visualization I've created. Here we have a new international airport being created on an island off of Seoul, Korea, and you can see the process of this new construction being built between 1984 and 2022. So we can image and analyze and monitor our planet for a wide variety of important applications. We also have out in the geostationary ring, geo is not just the domain of telecom satellites. We have an entire ring of satellites operated by many nations in the geostationary ring. And these are constantly observing our planet, not with high resolution, but looking at the entire surface of the planet. And these weather satellites perhaps are the most important satellite application that we have, because I live in the southeast of the United States in the state of North Carolina. And here in the upper right, you see one of the unfortunately many Atlantic hurricanes that we have every summer approaching the coastline of the United States. And we have now, with satellites, the ability to monitor, track these again for disaster planning and mitigation. So we do a wide variety of what we call Earth system science activities using these global geostationary weather satellites in cooperation with LEO satellites and people working on the ground using GPS, using field measurements. And these are the toolkits we use today to be able to understand and monitor and model changes in our spaceship Earth. No, there is no planet B. We don't have another place to go. And so we've got to manage this spaceship, and the toolkit for us to be able to do that is integration of satellite remote sensing, telecom, GPS, and all of these systems together. It's also undergoing comparable revolution, just like telecom. You all are living in a fascinating time to be involved in space, because we have a new generation of tiny, small, inexpensive, but very capable satellites. This is Planet, a startup company, bunch of young kids out of California started this, call it remote sensing 2.0. That's it. That's the satellite. That's one of the Planet satellites. They call them doves. Here are some of the guys down in what they call their clean enough room. This would make people at NASA get very nervous, but it's clean enough. And they've created, these are 3U CubeSats. And these are currently operating the world's largest commercial remote sensing fleet in existence. Planet has over 200 satellites operating in orbit right now, and they image the entire planet every day. And this provides us enormous capabilities that and Earth. And they have, as I said, over 200 satellites constantly imaging the planet and providing us with data. Here's a fascinating picture of Riyadh. And here are the two founders who I'm happy to say I know quite well. Both are alumni of the International Space University. And here they are holding one of their tiny little planet doves. And it's incredible. They have completely revolutionized how we do space remote sensing and operate the largest fleet of satellites in remote sensing today. Our third application, the third piece of commercial space, is the most recent. It's this new domain of satellite position, navigation, and timing. We call it PNT. It's also called GNSS, or Global Navigation Satellite Systems. And these are specialized telecommunication satellites. They again operate out in this MEO orbit, 20,000 kilometers or so, almost halfway out to GEO. And these provide us with global positioning, with atomic clock timing, and navigation services around the world. And I'm going to give you a complete lecture on this topic. It's fascinating. It's really interesting. It's driving all sorts of new uh, commercial applications, things like Uber and Lyft, high precision timing. And it's now actually a larger commercial market than remote sensing, although it's much more recent. Here's a joke slide. I tell people this is my car, so I actually know where I am. It's not, I don't really need that. I just have the one. But you have many national systems, the original US Navstar GPS. Now we have the Russian GLONASS, European Galileo, Chinese, Indian, and we're going to have more of these. And this is an absolutely vital part of our modern digital world today. If all of these satellites stopped operating, it would be a very bad day because these are enmeshed in our modern global digital world. And I'll talk to you much more about this in my upcoming lecture. A subset of this are what we call space telemetry systems. We have a global search and rescue system for aircraft and ships at sea. We have the Argos environmental monitoring and positioning systems, and we have many others. And these are all becoming an integrated part of the Internet of Things, the Internet of everything. Space is and will be even more important in this whole concept of the Internet of everything that is just on the doorstep of our world today. Now, one of the big issues that we have is spectrum and spectrum allocation. One of the problems, excuse me, we face is that spectrum is a finite resource. We cannot create new spectrum. Jim, as smart as Jim Green is, as good as he is, as smart as people are, we cannot make more electromagnetic spectrum. It's just what it is. And we are constantly developing new, more interesting, more uh, uh, commercial applications, and they all need spectrum. And so we have an entity, this gets into a fascinating space policy and law aspect. We have the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, and they every 4 years hold a World Radio Communications Conference. And it's here where all the nation states of the world come together and try to allocate the electromagnetic spectrum into all the many different existing and emerging new applications that we have. And these spectrum allocations have the force of an international treaty, but they also have no teeth. There is no ITU police. And just to show you an example of how complex this is the recent version that we got off the internet just this week. This is the spectrum allocation of radio frequencies for Saudi Arabia. And you can see how complex this is. and how we have many different parts of the spectrum have to share allocations because there simply is not enough spectrum. There's just not enough. And so they have to multitask, if you will, the spectrum. And this is a serious uh, problem. It's a growing problem. And we're going to have to deal with this more and more. And it takes us into policy and law domain of space. And you're going to get an excellent lecture on that coming up as well. So the future of all of this, the current state of the technology is fascinating. It's amazing. But the future is just what Arthur C. Clarke said. In order to imagine what the future of space and applications are going to be, we have to think so far out of the box. We're going to look at very soon, certainly in your professional lifetime, the functional integration of all of these things, daily, hourly remote sensing of our planet and other planets, position, navigation, timing, the Internet of Everything, in situ sensor measurement systems, AI, visualization, edge computing, the Internet. All of this is coming together into this critical mass of capability, all scales, at all places, and it's going to power many new businesses, many new applications, and it's a fascinating time to be involved in all of this. I'm a very large proponent and user of open source tools. I really believe strongly in the open source model of science, of activities, and I work great deal with open source remote sensing and positioning and geographic information systems. Work a lot with a great free software package called QGIS that is freely available, very capable, can be run in over 40 different languages that can help us harness the capability of all of these tools to make them useful everywhere and to everyone. So satellite applications is the original model of international cooperation in space. Even during the worst period of the Cold War, the United States and Europe and the old Soviet Union were cooperating on things like the COSPAS SARSAT search and rescue system. It's the original model for international cooperation in space. And the important point I want to say here is that it's the applications that makes space technology relevant to all the people of all of the world. I teach a great deal around the world. I work a lot in Africa. I've done many different projects in Africa, East Africa, and Kenya, and Rwanda, taught from years down in University of Cape Town in South Africa. And we have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and many people around the planet are trying to find ways to raise the population of our planet out of poverty. And the SGD are important, and space and our access to space and our ability to harness these extraordinary technologies are important tools for all of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And even more importantly, it's a statement that space is for all the people of the planet. So that's my introduction to satellites. I hope you found it interesting. Satellites provide numerous real societal benefits. It's where the money, it's where the jobs, it's where the commercial benefits are. It drives much of the other space industries. It drives the launch industry. It's changing extremely rapidly. Things are changing very quickly right now with all of these new LEO constellations There are many policy and law, engineering, science, fundamental basic science questions, spectrum of the allocation of these. It's a vital component of global sustainable development, and it makes space relevant to all of the people of Spaceship Earth. So I hope you found this lecture interesting, even perhaps entertaining, and I hope you have enough questions that can perhaps or have enough time and we can address a few questions or comments from people in the audience. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Any questions?
Ray.
Got-
So let's
got-
see, how do we do
got-
questions?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Jim.
All right. In terms of remote sensing, how can that be used in areas such as archaeology?
Yes, this is actually one of my personal interests. My degrees, believe it or not, even though I've spent almost all of my career working in the space field. In fact, my very first job after my PhD was working at a NASA research center doing remote sensing applications work using the Landsat satellites, wonderful satellite system. My degrees, all three of my academic degrees are actually in archaeology. And so I've worked at this interface between cultural resources and cultural resource management and space technologies. And I have written extensively in how we can apply these. And this is a really important issue because not only just for the basic science of studying our past, of human past, of the process of human development, but today with human population and also with climate change, we're seeing a vast number of archaeological sites, our cultural patrimony, our history are being destroyed, both by natural processes of climate change, but also by people looting, people stealing archaeological artifacts to sell on the illegal antiquities market. So one of the interesting areas that I've worked in for many years is this intersection between the application of scientific archaeology and what we call cultural resource management and how we can actually apply space technologies to these issues so that we can preserve our common human heritage for future generations. Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? I see we have some satellites have joined us. So
Scott, you talked about how satellites are one of the key areas in terms of communication network. How do you see the entertainment or the sports industry leveraging the space network?
it's a great question. How does the space world integrate with entertainment, sports, games? And we're right at the cusp of an incredible new leap in capability. This is where the new LEO constellations like Starlink, and there are several others that I'll mention in an upcoming lecture. These are going to fundamentally change the dynamic of how we can do sports and games and interactive video activities because of the lack of latency. In geo, it's so far out that it takes time for that signal to get out there and to come back. And so we have what we call latency in the signal, and that gives us delay on the ground. But these new LEO constellations like Starlink are so low that essentially the latency is functionally zero. And they're also expanding massively the amount of available bandwidth, both in terms of the total bandwidth, also the geographical distribution of the bandwidth. I just came back from lecturing in Australia just a couple of weeks ago. And Australia, of course, is very much in some ways like large areas of the Middle East, very broad distributed, low settlement pattern, uh, low number of people per hectare. And so Australia is leveraging things like Starlink to provide very high bandwidth, high reliable internet access. And of course, the practical benefits of this are things like teleeducation and telemedicine, but the business of this is going to be the Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, games, sports, interactive videos, and it's going to open up this entire new world opportunities for smart young people like hopefully some of the folks watching this lecture right now come up with new ideas to see how they're going to create the new next generation of what the future will be. Keep Arthur Clarke in mind. Don't be limited to what you think is possible. Feel free to create a future which is unbelievably cool.
One final question, Scott. If we adopt this globalism mindset, how can we set parameters for long-term um, global satellite launches and also ensuring recovery practices for clean technology, given that so many private companies are
Yeah,
now involved?
it's a great question. And we're operating on the cusp again of a new revolutionary capability in launchers. And so Elon Musk has obviously led the way with Falcon. He's got his next generation they just did the test firing. They're about to launch soon. And so we're going to have to come up with ways to be able to properly manage and regulate the launch industries. And this really brings us again to this whole domain of the intersection of the technology, of the business, and policy and law. And you're going to get a fantastic lecture coming up on space law. And Chris is going to talk exactly about the policy and legal issues that we're going to face with all of these new challenges and opportunities that we're going to be facing. Okay, I think that's all the time there is for this. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you.
Yes, it was great. It was great. And we're going to take a little break, charge our systems up, and in a half an hour we'll be back, and you'll be talking about remote sensing. All right.
That's right, my
Thanks.
favorite topic. See you
Your
then.
favorite topic. Take care. Thank you.
We move layers in silence, leave it all behind us. Meta visions are flying, to galaxies unknown. In space we merge with science, technology with no guidance. Yeah, we travel so far away. Fly, 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 we fly through the sky. New frontiers can open our minds. No, we're not so far from our dream. Energy brings us life. Running at the midnight, a white light, supernova, until the twilight, the bright skies, supernova, up to the moon, we will go beyond our reason tonight. We're going. We're going, we're going, we're going, we're going, we're going,